like what's your story? A word that I always get a lot is interesting, right? It's, oh, that's very interesting. Like you have like a uniqueness about you. Um, so I, for the first 15 years, have grown up on my reservation in Northeast Arizona. That being said, I grew up in a very, what I like to call a very conservative community, very small, with not many um, diverse representation. So when I started to realize in the ways that I was different from the rest of my community, it was very difficult for me to really grasp the concept of like, where do I fit in, you know? Um, so with its own cultural aspects of like, other than like your white American small town, right? Your generalized white American small town. I was raised by parents who instilled advocacy within me. I was taught how to speak up if I had questions, how to find the best solution rather than to be complacent with a certain situation. One of the things my father, I remember teaching me to do was if I was curious about anything, particularly about another individual, like who is that? I remember being like 5, 6 years old and always going around the work environment that my dad had been in, and there would be someone who would walk by and I'd never seen them before. So I'd approach my dad and be like, Dad, who's that? One of the things that he prompted me to do is like go walk up to them and ask them. You ask them. You want to know who they are. Um, so that form of finding the information out on my own was something that was instilled to me from my father from a very young age. Um, but when you're a kid, you really notice, like when we're kids, we all of the time notice what other people around us are doing, how they behave, how they interact, what they do. And having a condition that altered my skin color while also um, like noticing that the rest of my single family, I do have cousins who also have this condition. It is a hereditary genetic condition. So all the members of my family are carriers of this gene. And if they find someone and decide to have a kid with another potential carrier of the gene, it's a 50-50 chance that they could have someone who was born like me. But within my immediate family, like when I started to develop the sense of like, hey, I'm different. I'm not like everybody else. Um, the the essence of growing up on an indigenous in an indigenous community, where yes, although in education the history of genocide and forced assimilation is not touched on academically, it is instilled to us at home, right? In our home learning environment. It's the history that our grandparents, that our parents, that our elders teach to us. So growing up with my skin at a very young age and being taught this information, that is one of the major things that contributed to me at that time really being resentful of the way that I was born. Like why was I born in this skin? And again, like I said, when you're a kid, you compare yourself to other people a lot. Why am I not brown like everybody else? There was a time, where I hated my skin color, and in the traditional sense of my community. So like there was times where I recognized, oh, I'm not like the rest of my peers in my classroom. But when you transition into the ceremonial aspects of our tribal community, of our village community, and where I would travel like into the ceremonial, sorry, not travel, when I would transition into the ceremonial aspect of being part of my community, where our traditional ceremonies require us to like you typically do not wear like a t-shirt during certain occasions when ceremony is being taken place. So that was one thing that I encountered in terms of like having to, I guess, like feel this sense of being exposed. But also when I would travel into nearby towns, we are a very rural community. The nearest place would be in Winslow, which is about an hour away. But when I would go to either Winslow or Flagstaff with my parents, not only did I stand out because of my skin color, but sometimes I would have to use visual aid devices. So as a result of being born with albinism, I also have a visual impairment. I classify as legally blind. Um, And this is something that also helped to set me apart from everyone else. So like, yeah, there's this kid with white skin color who's in the class, but he also has difficulty seeing when he goes outside, and he's playing outside in the sunlight, and he has to constantly apply sunscreen to his skin, something like nobody else in my class really had to do. Having to wear sunglasses when they go outside because it hurts my eyes. Like nobody else had to worry about wearing sunglasses, wearing a hat, making sure I'm covered. Um, so those circumstances really helped to set me further apart in my my own personal perspective of how I was not fitting in with my peers and within my community. Um, but I was lucky enough to have parents who sought out the resources for me and become educated on my condition, in providing me with necessary accommodations, wanting to learn more, like what can we do to help support our son best. I am the youngest of 3 children. So, like the parenting thing, I'm pretty sure they had down by the time I came around. However, my 2 older siblings, my sisters, did not have this condition. So like learning how to accommodate for my needs, in terms of learning how to protect me from sunlight, learning how to make sure that I have access in terms of like visualization of like, like being able to see things and everything like that. That is something that they took upon themselves to become more educated on. Um, they taught me from a very young age how to protect me from sunlight and everything like that. And um, like I knew what they were telling me, but at the same time, I was still that kid who would play with his cousins or with his friends, and I would still be outside for like an hour or 2 hours at a time and not care if I had a hat on, not care if I did apply sunscreen to myself. It's funny because I'm surprised, like to this day, like I do not have an official diagnosis of like having skin cancer, being that we have the amount of sunlight that we do out on my reservation. And I was just that kid, like I wanted to be outside. And I would come home like beet red. Um, so of course, they applied all of the protective gear to me. And then as I got older, I was lucky enough that they then knew to shift the sense of responsibility of like applying sunscreen, making sure I had my hat, making sure I had my sunglasses, to myself. And like they gave me the experience of dealing with the consequence of like, oh, your whole backside is like sunburned. And now you're like peeling and it hurts, and like yeah, you can't go to sleep because like the irritation of just going through that healing process is something that I had to experience for myself. um, so being a kid, you think you're invincible and like a sunburn will go away, which it did. Like after a couple of days, like it's not so bad, right? But being that I grew up in Hopi culture, there was more to it than just like wear your sunglasses or make sure you have a long sleeve shirt on when you go outside. I did not always spend time outside just for the fun of it. Not all of the time. There were times and days where um, I had to help my family members. We are traditional dry farmers, and days out in the fields where you have a lot of just it's like a desert terrain area, and you have this huge massive field that you have to plant, and I have planted by hand, um, working in the hot sun, preparing all of the things that you need to do for either if the women need wood chopped because they're preparing their bread ovens for some ceremony that's coming up. Like I had to participate in just because it was my learning process of knowing the ins and outs of our ceremonial doings. So I had to adapt in like making sure I took my sunscreen with me, making sure I took my sunglasses with me. And of course there were experiences where yes, I didn't have a hat on me or I didn't have my sunglasses on me. So I had to endure going through those experiences and being in an outside environment on a very bright sunny day. And just like enduring and going through it. Like I don't have my shades. Oh well, I still got to do this. I also want to add another note in that people think that us with albinism, like it's the real bright, no cloudy, sunny days that affect us the most. Where in fact, if it is a cloudy day, there is actually more glare from the clouds that are covering the sky versus like just having no clouds in the sky at all. So when it's rainy and cloudy, my eyes hurt a lot, way more when it's like overcast and completely cloudy, because there's so much ultraviolet rays that are coming through. Think of it as like, it's basically the same thing of having snow on the ground and you don't have sunglasses on and you're looking at that light reflecting off of the snow. That's basically what it is. It's just up in the sky. That's what happens when it's cloudy. So that is one thing, throughout my whole youth and childhood of just going through the trial and error process of like, you need to be better prepared if you do not want to endure, these struggles again, if you don't want to hurt, if you don't want your eyes to hurt again. So it was my learning process. That was my learning process for myself. I am very headstrong and like, this is how I want to do something. And at the time, being a youth, I wanted to fit in. Nobody else had to wear sunscreen. Nobody else had to wear sunglasses. So like, I want to be like these guys. And as I have participated in village ceremonies, performing traditional dances, most of these dances, I mentioned earlier, we do not wear top clothing. We do not wear our shirts. So you can imagine how, vulnerable my skin would be in dancing in sunlight for an entire weekend. We have certain social dances that happen culturally where we dance not for one day, but for 2 days. It's both the Saturday and the Sunday. And it's not just like one performance and then you're done. No, you perform 4 times in the morning, 4 times in the afternoon. You break for lunch, but you go out 4 times. Our dance periods are typically anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes long. That's per set. So you do 4 sets of that for a half day, and then another 4 sets like the rest of the day. So one thing that I had to live with in like, if it was a ceremony regalia that you had to dress up in, we have our ceremonial kilt that the men wear. Sometimes there's some dances where they incorporate, like velvet shirts or ribbon shirts on top, and you can wear that. Other times, most of the time, it's like you don't wear any shirts at all. And it's like painting that is on your body and stuff like that. I just had to deal with being that one person who, like, I wore white t-shirts along with my, like traditional regalia clothing. So that is something, of course I hated, because like nobody else is doing that, but like I knew it was something that had to be done in order for my safety. And it's something that I hate using the word resented, but like I knew it wasn't to say like to a specific or to a certain standpoint, like it wasn't the right way to do it, because nobody else had to do it in that way. Like nobody else got to wear a white shirt. So yeah, that was, another key factor that played into like, man, like this condition sucks. Like I hate living like this, because it's forcing me to do this thing this way when nobody else is doing it this way. And due to my sensitivity to sunlight, certain adaptations have been made for me, such as like knowing how. Okay, so I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself here. So there are some things in terms of like accommodation, right, and providing accessibility for other people, where we can make a formal request, or other people can like assume for themselves what accommodations need to be made. Oh, is it too bright in here for you? I'm going to go ahead and close the blinds for you. Oh, is there something I can do to help you? However, a majority of those of us who live with certain conditions, we find our own ways of adapting and creating our own personal methods in order how to navigate the world around us. So like going back to school in a more modern environment, I was provided with numerous resources. And this is one thing that you really want to consider if you are working with students that have disabilities. In the learning environment, in the school environment, I was provided with numerous resources, so many resources to help with my low vision, such as having large print assignments. They would give me various magnification devices. There's like a magnifier that looks like a little snow globe. It's basically a dome. It can magnify 4 or 6 times, depending on the strength of magnification that you get. And I was also encouraged, this was the time when they were transitioning from like the green chalkboards or the black chalkboards in the classroom to the whiteboards in the classroom. However, just a pro tip, never write really in red or in green marker if you can. I would just highly recommend that, like right from the get-go, letting you know green marker and red marker is like the worst colors you can write on a whiteboard. Why? Because there's least amount of contrast between what is written on the board and having that white background on it. So I was encouraged a lot in grade school and in like middle school to like, oh, you can't see it, just walk up to the front of the board. Yeah, I'm going to do that as like a 10, 12-year-old kid. I'm going to just walk myself up to the front of the board in front of everybody, and then take notes because I can't see what's up there. Even though I was sitting in the front row every single year, everybody knew, all of my classmates, who went up in grade level with me, they always knew, oh, he sits in the front of the classroom. That's where I've always sat. Everybody else, like as the months go by, as you go through different quarters, everybody gets to change their seats. And, oh, I was in this row last quarter, but now I get to switch and change. And the teachers would do that every now and then. I always had the same seat throughout the whole year. And that really didn't bother me that much. I didn't really care. But like, it's funny when I look back and see how much I absolutely refused to use these accommodations that they were giving to me. And even though they provided with all of these various devices, all of these various materials, I had the mindset of a child still. And I only saw these things as a way of separating me from the rest of my classmates. It was not there to help me get the work done. It was there to help me seem different than everyone else. That's how I saw it. That's how, in my kid brain, that's how I saw these accommodations. Like, again, like nobody else is doing it this way. Why do I have to do it this way? So the large prints that they provided me with, let me give you a good example. The large prints that they provided me with, you have your standard 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, right? They blew up the font for me. And this was before, like people regularly printed off assignments from like computers. So like nowadays you could say, oh, I'll just make the font larger, the print size larger, and it'll reformat itself, and you'll just have like more pages of print, right? If it's in larger print, it'll just give you more pages to print off of. For me, the way they did it is that they used a Xerox machine. So they literally magnified not only the font on the paper, but the paper size itself. And the size papers that I would get were like double the size. So you have your standard size notebook paper, and add another one to the side of it. That was my paper size in landscape mode. So you had to turn it over. So like having to fold these assignments in half and then shove them into my backpack for like homework assignments. Again, my kid brain, like, why am I this dorky kid that gets like this ginormous assignment, like huge pieces of paper? Also, the colored paper that they printed it on was like an off-white color, just to reduce the amount of like brightness due to the white background. So it helped with contrast and like help with eye strain and stuff like that. But then again, a kid brain, being a kid, nobody else did it this way. So why do I have to do it this way? I could, in fact, read regular 12-point font paper, but of course, eye strain is a thing. I would get very eye fatigued very easily after reading for a while. The Harry Potter books, I would read, and that font is small. The Harry Potter books I read since second grade. I remember in fourth grade, I was like on the fourth book, and I was not using any magnifiers. And like comfortable place for me, like if I get my phone out, just to show you a level of comfort, if I could pull up some text. So like if I have a text font that's about like that size, it's my face is like literally smelling my phone. Like this is a good comfortable space for me to read font that is that size. So when I'm reading these books, you can imagine me like literally just having my face buried in the book like that. That was my whole childhood when reading the Harry Potter series. And like I was getting through it. Could I have probably read these books a lot faster had they been an audiobook format, which I really don't use anyway. Like I hate audiobooks. I like reading stuff myself. But like modern technology, we have tablets now. I have a Kindle, and I love that thing because I can reverse the contrast. I can make the font bigger. I can manipulate the font. which, by the way, you know, Times New Roman is like such a 90s font, and it's really hard to read. So if you are still a teacher, a professor, or anything like that, printing in Times New Roman, change that font, because it is very difficult to read, even if you make it, you know, in like a larger size. The typing font and just the way that the letters look, it's not really ideal. I will say that one of the fonts that I do use a lot is Verdana. So Verdana is very good in terms of like just legibility. You know, it's more accessible, it's easier to access. So it was I was in the mindset that all of these things only existed to separate me from other people. However, as I eventually got older, I then started to realize, okay, I'm kind of like falling behind in the workload that is being presented with me. So one device that I was presented with while I was in middle school is called a monocular. Now, same concept as a binocular where you have two. Monocular is just like one telescope you get to look through. And I utilized this tool a lot. I was surprised at how quick I like actually just started using it in like 7th grade when I transitioned from the elementary school to the middle school. And I was able to sit in my desk and I just pull out this little device, point it up to the chalkboard, and like I could read everything that was up there. I just had to pull out this little thing, put it to my eye, read, take notes, bring it back up, read, take notes. So when they trained me on the device, you know, I took to it very, very fast. It was something that I thought was really cool because like it wasn't like this huge telescope thing. It's like this little tiny thing I could just keep in my pocket. So that being more discreet, you know, obviously I knew people could see me, but like by then, you know, going to school for me for so many years, the kids already knew why I had to use it. So I didn't really have to explain anything at that point. So that was one thing that I did, you know, grow comfortable with. And I started growing more comfortable with using like magnification devices. By the time I was in 7th, 8th grade, they started rolling out more products, updated technology products, and like, you know, digital magnifiers. There was something called a Pebble, I think, where it's basically it looked like a old school touch, like the first brick phone touchscreen that you would ever have. But it was cool in that you could change the contrast settings. So you could do reverse contrast on that thing, and it had like a little camera on it that you could put on top of your devices. On top of my assignments or on top of my books, it was just this little digital screen. I'd put it on top of there. And actually my classmates thought it was pretty cool because it was like having a little camera device. And then they'd always ask to see it. So I kind of got attention for using that device because like, oh, that's so cool. I wish I had a camera like that. Like, obviously it wasn't a camera. Like, yes, I could take a picture of it, but I couldn't store those pictures. I could take a picture. It would like essentially just freeze frame it. If I wanted the freeze frame to go away, I just like press a button and then it would go back to like regular recording camera mode. But that was a device that I also had gotten comfortable with using. And looking back on it now, like, how was I not able to like realize that all of these things that these people were telling me to do and how to use was just to help me. But at the same time, like having the mentality that you have to basically be like everyone else. It's a cultural perception that is instilled in us at a very young age. We all want to mimic everything that we see around us, like how people behave, right? When we're young. So when you are different, when you stand out, you know, one of the things that I had to endure with from my peers was always being called out on those differences. Subtle jokes here and there. I wasn't picked on as much as like other people that I would eventually meet in my later years in high school, going to ASDB. But however, I did know that it was something that I had and that they would occasionally like made sure of to remind me of you know, of these certain conditions that I had. That there was always a way for them to remind me of it, whether if it was making light of it in a joke, it was like still pointing it out, like, oh, you're not the same as me. And the fact that like the fact of how attention, you know, when we're little, we always think that when we get people's attention, when we have the attention of other people, we always want it to be for a good thing. I want your attention. I want you to look at me because I'm doing something cool. I don't want your attention when I'm doing something embarrassing, right? That's what it is. That's basically how this mindset came into me. Um, Having to walk up in front of the class to look at the board and to take notes was an embarrassing moment. I did not want attention for that. Um, so how I perceived my own condition and how things needed to be adapted for me in order to participate with everyone else. Looking back now, I can say with confidence that the rest of my classmates really did not care how much um, like what I did or how I used um, certain devices in order to get my work done. Like looking back at it now, I can like get on myself and like honestly, nobody really cared about any of that, right? Um, but when you're a child, you know, with a condition that calls for you to do different things in a different way, and that like that form of separation, it plays a heavy impact on your self-confidence. And lucky for me, I was always driven and persistent in what I wanted to achieve. So that is the main reason I think why I was like, to give you a good example, when I had to do state standardized testing, they actually had a like this was back in the day when we still had to, you know, fill out the bubble sheets and you had like the booklet to take your exam on. They actually made a large print copy of that book, of that testing book for me. They offered it to me, but I flat out refused to take it. You know, no, I can see the normal size print, which like, yes, I'm struggling through it and my eyes hurt to see it, but like I can read it just fine, is what I told them. I do not want that big, huge book to be able to take my test exam on. However, here's the accommodation that they still provided me with anyway, and I didn't say anything about it. Um, you know, they tell you when you get those testing booklets, you're not supposed to mark in them. You're not supposed to make any marks in them. They allowed me to circle the letter of the answers that I had chosen. And then later on, they would give the bubble sheet to a staff person who would actually fill out that bubble sheet for me. I don't know if that's illegal, but that was something that was provided for me because like, I don't know if they were going to like fill in all of my answers accurately or not, but I ended up passing, you know, and I'd never had to take the high school level standardized testing after that because I passed my first year of taking it. But it was something, you know, just an experience where like I was just so stubborn and like, no, I don't want this accommodation. But it wasn't until after I had transitioned into moving down to Tucson where my mom forced me, literally she forced me, because leaving my my home reservation, I knew, one, I would lose the language, I would lose the culture, I wouldn't be able to participate in ceremonies as much anymore. And that played a huge role, you know, in my life. Out on Hopi, our ceremonies are year round. There's always something that you have to do or either prepare for. If you're not doing something right now, you're preparing yourself to do something like within the next couple of weeks or so. So moving down to Tucson, where I attended the school for the blind, it, you know, we always talk about acceptance. Number one underlying, if you want to make someone happy, they just need to be accepted by people around them. In my own head, I felt I wasn't accepted because of how different I was. So when I came down to the school for the blind in Tucson, I then was able to be introduced to other people who had my condition who were also from reservations. There was a lot from Navajo. There were several other people on my own reservation that I do know of. And like, it's interesting. I get a lot of questions from people like, oh, like Hopis have like a high population of like people with albinism, right? I'm like, yeah, but like not as much as Navajos. I have several Navajo friends where it's like them and their siblings, like them and three other siblings, or them and their parent. Like multiple people in the single family households have the condition apparent. Whereas like Hopi, it's like usually just like one person in a single family unit. But being able to connect and actually like hang out and socialize with this group of peers who shared this similar condition with me, that is when I finally like, okay, I'm not the only one. That's when like the moment of like self realization had hit me, and that there's nothing wrong with the way that I had been born. And like now I'm at the point where it's like this is just who I am. But the mere fact that it took me, you know, like 15, 16 years in order to have that mindset of not resenting the way I was born, of like, this isn't a negative aspect of my characteristic. It's just a different experience. I think that's something that really hits home in terms of like, if you are different in a certain way, it really does help to find a community. Now, fortunately for me, I was able to find that community. Some other people have not. And that's what prompted me to, I guess, really launch my media content, my social media content on YouTube. At the same time, I was still struggling with my sexuality. I did not come out until I was around 20 years old. However, I knew, like, I want to say, like, ever since 11 or 12 years old, that I knew I was attracted to other guys, but growing up in the cultural environment where I was taught, like being gay was like a gross thing. That's what, on top of the albinism and on top of the disability, like I don't need another label to add on to something that's going to make me to be different from the rest of the community. So that's something that I internalized for a while, not necessarily struggling with until like I was like 17 up until like 19. And it's the same story with that as well. I finally had the courage to come out to my family members because I found the LGBTQ community. Again, finding that sense of community and having people you can connect with and just talk with and discuss with, knowing that they understand the certain situations or emotions that you are going through because they themselves have experienced maybe not a similar aspect, but at least they get a grasping of what it feels like. That is one thing that helped me to be able to have the confidence to come out. Now, being a white person and being gay, though, is like totally different from coming from a minority community, ethnic culture, and being gay. Like, it's completely different. But just the fact that I know that I have a community within the blind community or within the gay community, and I have these connections, I can say that I know multiple people who share these identities with me. It makes a big difference. And it's the main reason why I grew more comfortable with accepting who I am and how I was. So moving into like why I started my YouTube channel. I just wanted to share my perspective, to share my story. And if other people had happened to either connect on the identity of like, oh, I also have albinism. Oh, I'm gay and I'm from a rural area and I'm native too. Or, oh, I'm just another native out there. I think that just being open to, and if you're willing to listen to other people, not only share stories, but if you're willing to engage in a dialogue and have a discussion with other people, one, it provides more awareness. Two, it allows you to like consider alternative perspectives where you might see a particular struggle that someone is dealing with and you empathize with that. Why do you usually empathize? It's because you probably understand a similar experience that you yourself have undergone. But when it comes to like having a discussion with this individual, you find out that no, it's not 100% the same as what they're going through. And through that experience of having that discussion, you then realize like, oh, I didn't consider this aspect and, and like pertaining to my own life experience. So that's I think one reason why I just started to start making the YouTube content. I started talking about living with albinism. And that was really the predominant factor because I could not find any other YouTube creators who discussed living with albinism. But then over time, my channel has evolved into just like, this is like, it's my channel. So it's really about me. I am an Indigenous person with albinism who also happens to have a disability, and I am part of the LGBTQ community. So when we talk about like intersectional labels and identity, forms of identity, all these different layers of identities that I have some way impacted me and my life experience in terms of knowing what it's like to be left out, especially when there's so many layers. Gay people can feel excluded from this experience because this isn't considered. Disabled can be excluded from this experience because this aspect isn't considered. Native people are excluded from this experience because this aspect is not considered. So when I am talking about me and my layered identities, my intersectional labels, I then become an advocate within those sub-minority groups to also voice, if you're a Native and disabled person, yes, this is one way where considering this person's Native identity, but it is also still not accessible because of this other label. Same thing within the gay community, same thing, so I'm able to really, from my standpoint, I can still speak to ways of how can we improve, experiences in order to incorporate people that can still potentially feel either left out or left behind in certain gatherings or certain functions, you know. Um, so these are ways that I found, like what I described to you in going to school and everything like that. These are ways that I found how to navigate the world around me, and things with, I also had like low vision specialists that came to work with me in school. One thing um, I am extremely grateful for is, again, just those connections that I've been able to make. The number one thing you can do for someone who is struggling is just help them find their community. That is the number one underlying thing. And that is the reason why I talk about so many labels. Because when I discuss these things, I know that I can connect with, vast amounts of people, just because we can relate on whatever subject I can potentially talk about. And like now, all of these adaptations that I use in using magnification software on like my computer in the workforce, in the work environment, I learned how to read Braille. I also decided to pursue sign language in college, and all of these things, help me to communicate with other people. It's really interesting at how I went from this kid of like, I want to try to shake off this certain aspect, this certain characteristic about me, to where now like I'm fully embracing all these different identities and finding ways in how it's helping me to connect with other people and communicate with other people and like really just be an example. So it was mentioned earlier that I work in secondary education. So my job title is behavioral intervention monitor for my school campus. And one thing I see myself in that role in working with youth, I work at a middle school, so it's like, kids 11 to 13. Very impactful age still. They're still absorbing a lot. And one thing that I see myself is serving as representation. A lot of and I do work in a Title I school. So a majority of our student population is brown. So when kids find out that I am in fact Indigenous, sometimes they're surprised and everything like that. But at the same time, the attitude in our connection and our exchange and how I talk with that student and how they talk to me, it shifts. Once they know that I am coming from a community of color, then there's like a totally next level connection that goes on between me and the student, because they know like the background aspect, right, of the culture that these kids grow up with. But also, like, once I mentioned that I have a husband, if a kid is potentially struggling with their own identity, and they like might think in the back of the head, I might be gay, they might not have officially come out yet, but at least they know that I am a resource. They know that I am an example of a gay man who is living, and I have a career, I have a marriage and everything like that. And like, it's okay. That's one thing, and why I hate using the word vocal, but that is the one reason why I do not try to hide my sexuality in my work environment. Just to serve as an example. Like, it's okay to be a gay male. Like, I'm living my life, I'm doing it, and then with the disability thing, there are several kids that I have worked with who have visual impairments, and I make sure to especially introduce myself to those kids when we have new kids like that. We recently got a new student who is completely deaf, so I introduced myself to her. I was signing to her. So that was one, another connection that I made. All of these things, I make sure to let these children know that this is something that I am coming from. This is something that I know. This is something that I have, just to make that established connection, to let them know that I understand, or I can potentially help you if you are struggling with anything. And the teachers know that about me as well, and they love it when, if they're having a student in their classroom and they're struggling on a particular thing, they know that they can ask me to, like, hey, can you do a checkup on the student? Call them into your office and touch base with them. But also on my part too, my boss, the principal of my campus, she knows, and she calls me a huge advocate for students, because what I'll do on the students' behalf sometimes is like, hey, this is one solution that might work if, in this situation. So my boss really loves me, and in that I always have like a game plan set up for this one kid with either a visual impairment or like behavioral issues. I do my best to advocate for these kids. And the main reason why I do it, again, it's just my childhood experience of knowing what it feels like to be excluded, or what it feels like to not be understood, or what it feels like to feel frustrated when you don't, like, you're a peg that doesn't neatly fit into this particular shape because of whatever way you might be different from the majority of students around you. And all of these adaptations, I just have come to embrace, and letting the students know there's more than one way to achieve reaching your goal. I was fortunate enough to go to school in a generation where computer access was full-time when I was in high school, and it was necessary for me to turn in my work using Microsoft Word. So I was lucky enough to have a form of adaptability in using technology to get my work completed. However, there are certain magnification softwares that I was taught how to use, and now Windows. If you have a Windows computer or even an Apple computer, there's ways where you can magnify your screen and make things more accessible. Like, that is completely awesome. However, there's some new things that I taught myself while going to a school for the blind. I can navigate a whole computer without the use of a mouse. And it's really cool to do, like I know the key commands and how to invert colors on the screen. I know the key commands to how to open stuff, close stuff, copy stuff, paste stuff, all of these shortcut key commands. It's really amazing to see how far the technology has come in providing me, not only me, but like just anybody in general, a means of helping to accomplish certain tasks and goals in a different way, and like, I consider myself a really to be alive in a time where technology is playing such a huge influence, where, as like in a traditional sense, coming from the Native community, like, we're bashing on technology, and like it's like changing everything around us too soon, right? Like in the traditional sense, in terms of preserving our culture. However, I always am a strong advocate, and like, wait a minute, if it weren't for this technology, I wouldn't be able to do this and to do that, and I am always a strong advocate for that. And that technology has helped the disabled community so much that if you take it away from us now, we would lose access to at least half of the functions that we are able to complete now because of this technology. And so this is just like my whole story, and how I came to embrace, not using the adaptations that was provided for me, toward stumbling upon them myself and like, oh, it does work, or creating and inventing my own method and ways of completing things. I am an artist. I sell art, and a lot of people are like amazed. I'm like, how do you do that? How do you complete all of these intricate designs? I actually have a couple examples with me. So like, this is hand drawn. I don't know if it's focusing in as sharply, but that is like hand drawn. It's hand painted, and it's like a little tiny shape. It's like that size, and I'm able to, to paint these designs. A lot of people like, I thought you were blind. How are you able to do that? Like, you don't know what a person is capable of. And, going back to that child mentality, we always make assumptions, and we always judge people based off of either appearance, or like we always assume limits, right? And one thing that I try to do as much as I can through my work in these advocacy presentations is like you don't know what a person's limitations are if you allow them to have the confidence that they have. Um, and with that, I would like to use this time to now transition into the second portion of my presentation, but I want to also take a quick break. So if the co-host wants to take over and would like to add your little 2 cents and like what you what you thought of everything that was just said, but if you want to do like take some questions, we can do that too, just like for about a good 5-6 minutes. And then we'll transition into the actual like my interactive part of my presentation. So what I'll go ahead and do, I'll turn the mic over to you. And if you want to read off the questions for me, I'll like let you be the panelist and you can select which questions you want to submit that are in the chat. You guys can submit your questions in the chat about anything that I have just said. So yeah, thank you guys so much for sticking with me for this long.
Awesome. Okay, so we have a comment by Zainab Samantwala. That's a comment I'm familiar with. I don't know if you wanted to expand on that, Zainab, using either the chat or unmute yourself.
Hello? Oops. Hello?
We can hear you.
Yay, okay. I was specifically referring to the, the comment you're blind, how can you do that? Or you're supposed to be blind, how can you do that? And so that perception of like what is blindness and what is blindness supposed to be versus what it actually is. Like I've gotten that comment more times than I can count, which is the how are you able to do that? It's like, well,
yes, exactly right. So when we use these labels to communicate, yeah, like I tell people I'm disabled. But really, if you were to look at me in everyday, like if you were to like just walk past me like in the mall or out on the street, you have there's some people where we say they have an invisible disability. Unless you see me walking with like a white cane in a store, you're not going to tell that I have a visual impairment, or unless you like really avidly pay attention and to how I use my phone, how I read, like how closely I bring things to my face in order to see them. But like, no, you're right. When we use a label like blind, a certain notion comes in, like a picture comes into someone's head of like, oh, that's what a blind person is. When in fact, we use the term spectrum, right, a lot. And working in education, especially if it's in special education, the term spectrum can be applied to so many things. Like there's not one way to be blind. There's not one way to be native. The native label too is something that I struggle with constantly. Like some people, yes, do say like, oh, I can see it in your facial features. So yeah, I believe you. But other times it's like they don't know that there's like light skinned natives out there. And I always joke, I'm like, I'm just as light as like the northeastern natives up in that area and like up in Canada.
Yes, Zainab said, yes, all of this. So if there's any questions or any comments about that anyone wanted to talk about, feel free to or unmute yourself or ask any questions in the chat.
Yeah, please give my voice a rest and you guys can ask your question.
Hi, this is Stina. I was just actually wondering, one piece of what you shared was about your art website, and I'm wondering if you have that accessible to share with us.
Actually, yes, I do. Let me go ahead and put it in the chat right now. So the first thing what I'm going to put down is my tag name. You can find me this username. So my Hopi name, Samit Vaya, I use all across my social media platforms. So if you put this name with the @ symbol in front of it, you'll find me on Facebook, you'll find me on Instagram, you'll find me on TikTok. And that is the name of my Etsy shop. So the Etsy shop is just etsy.com/shop/Samit Vaya, but I'll go ahead and put it in.
Yes, I definitely recommend taking a look at their artwork and their earrings because I have. Any other questions? or even if you resonated with something that JD was
Yeah,
talking
share your own experiences. I'm all for that.
Hello, my name is Sol Martinez. I'm Southern Paiute, and I'm a music education major. I just want to say that I really appreciated this this talk because I am going into education. So just like hearing all this really like helps out. With what I
Yeah,
want.
no worries there. I actually am a musician, and I married a composer. So
Awesome.
Hi JD, my name is Kevin Wright. I use he, him, his pronouns. I also work in SDSJ alongside Emily. I just want to say that I really do appreciate everything that you've said. I personally identify as someone who is Afro-Indigenous, also with a hidden disability. So a lot of what you said definitely resonated with me. So I really do appreciate you making space to speak to these topics this afternoon.
thank you so much. Yeah, no, we were just discussing before this, everybody else joined us in how lately have been more active on within the TikTok community. My content that I'm creating on the TikTok platform pertaining to Native identity, more specifically like cultural identity. How do we associate, our cultural identity within the Native and Indigenous communities? It's like a really big gray area. So yeah, no, I think it's really important to have these discussions in terms of like identity, in terms of experience, because I think it really is important for us to realize that we all have a bit of like a bias, right, in our own experiences, to where if we undergo a certain I use the word experience a lot. If we undergo like a certain culture of upbringing or a situation that we have encountered, right, we then, like in the back of in the back of our heads, I think we have this notion that it's kind of like the same for everybody else, but in fact it's not. A good example I could use is like my cultural identity. I know the colonial history within my own tribe, but like it's not the same for someone who is from another tribe, from another state, from another region, and it's like completely different. So when we look at our own identities, I think it's important to know that there's diversity even within these diverse communities themselves. Okay, so I say we're good to move on to our next section. What I am going to require for you guys, and I went ahead and let them know, when I do presentations like in person, I really love engaging. A good example that I gave earlier was if like, okay, so you give a presentation, right? And you're consuming content, you're consuming information. Same thing is true with like reading a book, right? You're consuming information, you're gaining knowledge. However, unless you like really were into that book and like it captivated you, and like you're going to remember that book for the most part. However, if you're just reading like something that's on an informational pamphlet, or if it's like something for a class that you have in college, you're going to obtain that knowledge for as long as it's necessary, and then you're just going to disregard it. What I think a lot of people have are apt to more retain a lot in their minds is like actual conversational discussions, something that you are actively engaged in, something that you participate in, that stays with you for a lot longer than like just listening to someone talk the whole time. So for the next half of this presentation, I am going to require your guys's, feedback and input, and like, don't be afraid to hold back with what you have to share. So I'm going to go ahead and get my screen ready. Am I coming across as like the main presenter? I'm going to go ahead and do the be doing a presentation.
You should, and if not, I can give you that access. Let me see.
Okay.
Oh, yes, it's coming up.
Okay. And then everybody, I think, can just like click on my window if they want it to be like the main focus, right? Okay. So this is a presentation. Let me adjust my mic. So this is a presentation that I had put together for school counselors within my state, and how to better accommodate students with disabilities, how to better work with and support students with disabilities. And I think it's a really, I thought it turned out great. I thought it was a really good presentation. So I wanted to share it with you guys today and have your feedback and your engagement with this. So growing confidence. I think the number one thing in order to have someone be their own advocate, right, is having that self-confidence within them. How do we grow that self-confidence? It starts, of course, with the emotional support when they're younger, letting them know that they are supported, they have that support. The next very big important thing is visibility and representation. What are the examples that these children have to look up to, or anybody for that matter? It just doesn't have to be a kid. Who do you have to look up to that is also visible with whatever label you might have, right? To be able to connect with, to be able to know that you're not alone. And then the third one is accountability for advocacy. You can also have, you can always have advocates, like what I do with my students on campus. I am an advocate on their behalf. Most of the time, they never ask me to advocate for them. However, it is something I know that they need, and usually they go along with it, right? However, as we get older, it's like you become accountable for yourself. So how do you start to train people how to become advocates for themselves? And this is something that I think, we all need, at least a little bit of improvement on at some point, in how to just better be representatives and how to convey certain things. So this is something that I always start out with. We don't have to do it here. So one thing I start off my presentation with is by saying, I can't see your hands. I have a visual impairment. I'm blind. I can't see, especially if it's in a huge room, right? And there's a lot of people there. So if you have a question, or if you want to add something, a comment, and you raise your hand to speak, I'm not going to be able to see you raising your hand. So these are just like quick examples that I give. In terms of adaptations, how can you adapt the space? How can you adapt practices to be more inclusive with people that have certain conditions? So one thing that I tell my my audiences is, when you raise your hand, please say your name. Now, obviously, we're on Zoom, so you're gonna say your name anyway, right? It's a given. We're all used to the Zoom culture now. It's something that you do automatically when you want to speak now. But if you were in a room with me, like in a gymnasium, and I was giving this presentation, I would let you know, when you raise your hand, please say your name. That way, I know, one, you're raising your hand, but also two, I can't read a name tag if it's on you. Like usually conferences and everything like that, people write their names on a name tag. I can't see your hand, so obviously I'm not going to be able to read that name tag. So also, one, if I say JD, I'm raising my hand. One, I know you're raising your hand. Two, I know what your name is. So that's how we better accommodate. The other thing is clapping for polls. What I mean for that is, all your dirty minds, I know, get your mind out of the gutter. Clapping instead of raising your hands. So like if I ask a question, how many of you guys had breakfast this morning? Then like your automatic response is like to automatically raise your hand, right? What I do instead is, when I ask a question, and if I want an answer from like a crowd generalized answer, how many of you guys like blue? What I'm going to do is I'm going to say it like, clap your hands on 3 if you've had breakfast this morning. 1, 2, 3, and then everybody claps, right? So that's how I can get a general sense of how many people in the crowd or in the room either agree with something, or like whatever general question, if it's a yes or no. That's one method that I use in order to be more accommodating for me. So that's just some examples that I have, and how we can make things adaptable for whatever reasons. So confidence. What is confidence? Basically, it's trusting yourself, right? Knowing that you can believe in yourself, having a certain faith in yourself, trusting yourself that you can do anything, and overall resilience, because you're always going to encounter obstacles, right? Someone's going to say, oh, you can't do that. I don't think you'll be able to do that. Or whatever obstacles you'll encounter, could potentially like deter you from wanting to continue. So you have to have a little bit of resiliency in with you. So that basically is confidence. How do we foster having someone trust in themselves, believe in themselves, and be resilient? Basically turning that I can't into I can do this, I can do this, rather than like, I'll never be able to do this. This is the fun part. Well, next slide. So one thing that I always like to say, again, going back on thinking that a particular label has to fit into a certain box, right? This is an example I like to show a lot, that comparative culture is such a huge thing, that it's really crazy at how much we doubt ourselves, or how much low self-esteem we have amongst ourselves because we are comparing ourselves to other people. When it's like, that person is their own person and you're your own person. Like, you're not supposed to be the same, right? If you can get what I mean. So this is a cool cartoon that I found, and I just I like sharing it with other people. So like, comparing yourself to others is like really dumb, because you have two totally different experiences. There are so many factors that go into your own life experience that are just uncomparable to anybody else on the planet. So compare culture, we just got to eliminate that. Yes, we do find commonality and we do find communities by, finding the similarities and things that we share. However, we do need to be reminded that shared experiences are not 100% the same. You could share an identity. Your experience of living that identity is going to be completely different from another person. So this activity, if you have something to write with, that's fine. If you have like a Word document you can pull up on your computer, something to write with, just something you can jot down notes on, I'd ask that you guys do that now. I'm going to go ahead and give you like a minute just to gather something if you would rather work with like pen or pencil and paper. But like opening up another tab with like Google Docs or something, whatever you can do to type. Okay, so this is going back off on my story that I had given about myself. This is how I saw myself as a kid. And I guarantee you, if you're working with any children, this is what it's going to be. So based on a disability or condition, what I usually do for this exercise is I make you create a person inside your head, right? So let's go ahead and do it that way. You're going to create a person or a student or a kid, inside your own head. Give them a name, give them an age, and you are going to give them a disability or a condition. It can be any disability, it can be any condition, or you could use yourself as an example, diabetes, cerebral palsy, blindness, deafness, or even, like I said, diabetes, some health issue, it can be an allergic reaction, something, I guess, whatever condition you want your child to have. Okay, so once you create your person, what would their physical appearance be? What would their behaviors be? I want you just to make a quick list, like 2 or 3 things down. How would they look? If they have a physical disability, would that alter their physical appearance? If they have a cognitive disability, like autism, how would that affect their behaviors? Just like 2 or 3 things, like just jot that down real quick. After that, I want you to make a quick note. How are you regarded? How is your student or how is your person regarded by others? A good example I left here is like staring. Because of their condition, how are they treated by other people? Also, because of their condition, what accommodations are needed for that person? Do they need to use certain devices? Do they need certain assistance in helping things to get done based off of the condition that you gave your child? Also, based on the condition that your kid has, how are their abilities judged in comparison? What are some comments that they could receive from other people in using that comparative culture? Because they have this condition, are there any restrictions or limitations to their abilities? If they have an allergic reaction, obviously they can't eat this or that. But what is like one or two limitations that this person would have because of this condition that they have? I'm sorry. I thought I did not know I was still on mute that whole time. Okay, so just recapping this whole slide. You should have a kid by now, and made notes on all of these pointers that I had made. So what are some differences they might have either physically or behavioral wise because of their condition? How might they be regarded by their peers? What accommodations do you think they might have because of the condition, and how are they being judged by their peers, being compared to someone who doesn't have their condition? Also the restrictions and limitations based on whatever disability that you gave them. So if you'd like to share your kid right now and just run through that list of like, these are some of the obstacles that they might encounter. This is what their life experience might be like. Go ahead and unmute yourself, share your name, and like, this is the name I gave my kid. This is how old they were. And this is the things that they have to deal with in their day-to-day lives. So go ahead and share.
I can share first. This is Emily. My name's Emily.
Cool.
So thinking back to like experience I've had, especially working with youth, I thought around especially like mental health and how youth with PTSD are treated, socialized, and how it's like systematic to basically view children with either mental health issues or even like if they have behavioral issues as like broken or troubled. How they would maybe appear is like anxious, hyper aware. They would have a lot of fear. Some restrictions they may have is like, just like emotional regulation, maybe low trust, which be worked with.
How would they be regarded by like peers? Like, what are some things that peers might say about them just based off of those behaviors?
Maybe like not having friends or people not knowing how to create relationships with them, especially with when trust is low, right? Especially
Anybody else? At least one more. Anyone?
For me,
Bueller?
sorry, this is Sol Martinez. For me, it was kind of difficult to just like place like a disability or condition because I'm not very like educated on like specific ones.
Mhm.
But I guess I could speak for like the condition of anxiety, like like other students might be like, oh, it's not that hard to go speak in front of the class, like just do it. But then like
Yeah.
they have this internal like dialogue, like I can't do this because someone will say this about me, or they'll see that my voice is shaking, they'll think that I'm crying, and then it'll just become a big thing.
Mhm.
I guess like accommodations that could be in place for that. It's just like
Yeah, but then also like this kid could be judged for like they can't speak for themselves, right?
yeah, that too.
Yeah.
I guess like an accommodation that could be put in place could be like the teacher could like help them, like maybe ask them questions as they're presenting something. Be like, okay, like if they're starting to get like lost or like they could see that the student's being more anxious, they could ask them questions to get them back on the right track.
Mhm. Yeah. So what I want to transition into now is we basically have different environments, right? That we exist in. One at the top you can see is like the playground. So there's the environment that you have with your peers and kids, how they interact with other kids when there's not really that much monitorization. Like recess time is a good example. We don't know how those kids interact with one another, which is a reason why we have like bullying stories that come up in, in some situations. Then there's the environment of the classroom where who is in charge of the classroom. You have that instructor in there and it's their realm and you have to operate under their rules. Which is, a completely different contrast. And then there's the home environment, right? So there's a huge difference in how, if you have a certain disability or condition, you're treated, at least in my experience, I know for a fact that it is very different treatment from the work environment in the school environment versus the home environment, right? There tends to be stereotypically a lot more coddling that is done at home, versus there's more push for independence and pushing the limitations in the work and school environment. So that's one thing that I wanted to bring up in terms of our experiences as living with these different labels. We are also need to be very aware of how certain things shift based on the environment that we are in. Um, so advocacy versus dependability, right? This is something that I usually like to have discussed. Again, just going through the contrast between the home and the school environment. So in the home environment, it plays a huge role in how the parents and family treat the condition themselves. Is it positive or negative? How do they deal with their child having this condition? How do they accommodate it, or how do they try to eradicate it through certain practices? What is expected of personal what is the expected what is to be expected of personal responsibility by the family? How much personal responsibility are they giving this child with this condition? Are they giving them the opportunity to like learn and like, oh, you need to speak up more? Or are they totally like taking over and like, oh, don't worry, I'll take care of it for you and I'll do this and that for you? This is what needs to be done for them, rather than they need to advocate for this on their own. What extra work do family members do to put in to accommodate limitations? How far are you willing to go? Like, yes, a good example I could use is transportation. For me, I do not drive, I do not have a license. So my family, I'm very heavily dependent on my family transporting me from point A to point B, especially now. I do not use Uber or Lyft. I was a frequent Lyft person. Now I don't even use that service anymore. So then like what's expected of me in terms of like letting them know ahead of time, hey, I have this appointment, I need to be dropped off at this location here and there. I do not have the luxury, and I always talk about this too. I do not have the luxury nor the freedom to like get in a car and take off whenever I want to. I just do not have that. That's one aspect of like I have no control over in my life. In when I can leave someplace and when I can arrive at someplace, that is out of my control. I'm dependent on whoever's driving me. And there's some tense moments within my family where like I've got the feeling like I'm blamed for not making something on time, or like if someone wants to meet me and I can't meet them because like I know that this other person who's going to drive me is exhausted, and I don't want to feel, like I I don't want to feel insistent on this person, right? I don't want to, like, if I know my husband's tired, I'm not going to ask him to take me anywhere, even though like I really want to go, and do this or do that. I'm not going to ask because, there's that boundary level of that I'm trying to navigate in terms of like like how far, like how much is asking for too much, So versus the school environment, your friends and your classmates, how they perceive the condition, because they might not have seen it before, and ways that they can help. I remember being smaller and in class, and a lot of my classmates, some of them would remind me like, "Hey, did you put your sunscreen on? Oh, hey, here's your hat. Don't forget your hat. You need your hat." So it's really interesting to see that how the community like just jumps in, and how much they pay attention to like, oh, you need help with this. The other thing is, the teachers give accommodations automatically, or do they request it by, or are they requested by the student? So a good example again would be for me in like just, they never asked, like, okay, so they knew I needed that large font print, right? In like the ginormous sheets of paper. I never asked for it. They just provided that for me. I hated it, but like, it's what they gave me, so I used it. But then like there came a time where like I just refused to use it, right? Because they never asked if like, do you want it in large font or do you want it in regular font? And this is something that I always advocate on, like, if you know that it's an accommodation that somebody needs, but if they're like outright refusing it, it is their right. It's like going to the doctors, right? You have the right to refuse treatment, so you cannot force someone into doing something a certain way. They just, give them that freedom of choice. That's what I am a strong advocate for, even if they're going to struggle through it. Freedom of choice, in terms of dignity, is the best thing you can give another individual, no matter how hard you see them struggling, because it will be a learning experience. So what can cause frustration and living with certain conditions? Again, being a kid, you're already going through so much emotions, right? So in terms of physical disabilities, hearing loss is an example, blindness, loss of limb function. You have those physical limitations, hearing loss, not being able to fully participate in a conversation with hearing people. What did so-and-so say? There's not a translator present. So I don't know what anybody else is saying, if someone's talking behind my back, I won't be able to hear them. So that's something that I'm missing out on. Blindness. A good example is I've had someone mention they've encountered various experiences while they're hanging out with friends, and their friends start laughing because of something that they see. And then the blind person is like, what's going on? But then nobody says anything, right? These are just daily frustrations that people can live with. Loss of limb function. I can't do this or that. I just wish I could be able to do this. Emotional or cognitive disabilities such as ADHD, autism, anxiety disorder, of course, those have their own realms in how just really, I guess, how the thought process can form within certain people. And then health conditions, diabetes, asthma, celiac disease, all of these things that limit, what you can have, what you can do. It's definitely frustrating when we're thinking in terms of like, oh, the rest of my classmates get to do that, but I don't get to do it. So these are the major social realities, a list that I made of being different. One, you're always teased, bullied, or you're always looked at, right? You stand out. Different treatment from strangers. Like they know you're different to the extent where sometimes they might be too accommodating, or they'll point out this certain aspect of you way too often, like, yes, I know. And three, always having to explain your condition to other people. In a TikTok upload that I made earlier today or last night was the fact that I'm a gay individual, and talk about being gay and always having to come out constantly to other people, like when you meet new people. However, another thing I always have to constantly come out to is my ethnic identity, my cultural heritage. That is one thing I am constantly always having to advocate on. Like, I am Native, I'm Native, I'm Native, and having to justify my Native identity to other people, because they just don't believe it. So, that's just a reality of my life. That's just something that I have to do on a daily basis. The need for alternative methods to achieve the same goals as peers. This is the big thing in which I really try to let other people know is there's more than one way of doing things. I know that we've grew up in a system where we are told this is a specific way and method you are supposed to do this thing. However, adaptations are a thing. If there wasn't more than one way of doing things, then we wouldn't have like GED programs, right? Anything like that. Anything can be accommodated. The use of, this using Zoom right now, this is an accommodation. This is how we're working around certain obstacles where, we can meet in a physical environment. So now we're doing it virtually. Had this technology been around like 10 years ago, disabled people would have so much more accessibility to classes and to not being docked for, skipping class or missing out on class because they had an appointment or, they have some physical condition that required them to take care of something else. And then yet they're suffering attendance points for it because they just can't physically be in class. But yet now we know through this technology, remote learning is like a thing. I can still attend class virtually if you were to set up a Zoom class session. And then, is a condition congenital or not? This is a big one. And one thing that I like to touch on, again, our experiences are subjective, very subjective in terms of how we see our identity. Having a congenital condition, meaning that you were born with a condition, and I was born with this condition, this is normal for me. My experience in living with this condition and living with my low vision, this is normal for me. So when I have people asking me, oh, what if you did have brown skin? What if you could see like perfectly 20/20? And like, it's kind of like an insult. Oh, good story, good story. I have a good story for you guys. One time this is back when I was still in college. I was using my white cane. I was taking the bus on my way to class. And I had this guy like walk up by me. One of the comments that he said, and yes, I know he meant this as a compliment, but like one thing he said, he sees me with my shades on and my white cane out, right? And I'm walking away from the bus. I'm heading, to where I need to go. He's walking alongside me. And he says, all he knows is that I have sunglasses on, that I have a white cane. He doesn't know how well I can see versus how bad I can see. The comment that he makes is, man, I don't know what I would be doing if I was like in your condition and like you being out here and living your life and just like doing all these things. Or like, I didn't think anything of it until like way later. And like, cause I just kept walking. And I'm like, he basically said, if he were in my condition, he would be saying literally like he would not do a thing. Cause like his life would suck so much if he were put into my boots. He wouldn't be able to function. So like, I know it's like meant to be like, oh, you're so inspiring for doing what you're doing. Like, this is normal for me. I don't know what it's like to not be like this. But at the same time, this also made me realize not to be judgmental on people who are adjusting to living with a disability, living with blindness. I can say, yes, I did it, so you can do it too. That can kind of be condescending in a way, because I don't know what it's like to lose vision. I don't know what it's like to go from having perfect vision and having the capability of being able to drive a car to not being able to drive a car anymore because I can't see anymore. I don't know what that experience is like. So I cannot judge other people when they are transitioning into a state of being to where they are now incapable of performing tasks that they no longer can. So that's, in a way, I guess you can say that being born with my condition has allowed me to it's a privilege in a sense, right? Because I know how to advocate for myself. I know how to, perform adaptive tweaks here and there in order to maneuver around certain getting things taken care of. Whereas someone who is newly disabled, they literally need to, be retrained in how to live their life and how to perform certain tasks. So that's just one thing I just also like to make a note on. So this presentation is meant for, like the school environment. I know not everybody is going into education, but just be wary. And we all know kids have a lot to say, comments, questions, reactions, sometimes it's uncontrolled, dealing with ignorance and picking your battles. This is a big thing. on social media, I always get so many different comments about my looks. Even within a Native community, there's some like a handful of Natives that still call me a white person. And then it's just really knowing when to stand your ground and knowing when to like just let it go. The underlying thing is understanding your condition and explaining it. One thing that they had me do at an early age was they taught me about albinism. So like I can tell you it's a congenital genetic disease. They had me learn the parts of the eye. I forgot all of that information now, but like they taught me these things so that I can comprehend what it actually was, you know, rather than just saying it is what it is. You know, like I could actually explain how the genetics work and all of that stuff. And there's different various types of albinism that are out there. So understanding your condition and knowing how to explain it to other people is a vital necessity if you have any condition with you, just because you're going to have people who are going to ask you questions. So, you know what your condition is. Do the research on it if you don't really like, you know, whatever your disorder is, whatever your condition is, if you have a disability or not, have that information ready. Because you are going to have to be ready to combat ignorance when it happens out of the blue. So ways to develop advocacy, almost done, I promise. Being educated about the condition, one, of course. So, you know, one thing that you guys have done is invite me to speak to my experience. You know, being educated on at least my experience and living with my conditions. Two is encouraging interactions with those who can relate to you. Again, finding the community is everything. Being allowed choices for accommodations and suggestions, not you need to do it this way. You know, again, for that dignity effort, you always have to give them that freedom of choice. Do they want to accept the accommodation or not? Allowing some leeway in struggling to discover the necessary adaptation. This is something that I encountered myself. This was my way of realizing, oh, this method really is better for me. Like it is easier for me to do it this way than to try to, you know, strain my eyes out and try to read regular font. All of that is just self-realization. At least that's what I believe. You need to give them that freedom of choice to either accept or deny help, and have them discover ways of like, oh, I need to do it differently because it's a lot easier that way. That's a journey of self-discovery. So the underlying question really that kids will have is like, where do I fit in, right? And that's why I think it's important to highlight, you know, just diverse identities, diverse labels. I do this because I can fit in with so many different communities by being vocal about these various identities that I have. So seeking a community is definitely important, getting to know others. You can talk about your experiences, resources, of course, learning about the means of accommodations and adaptations. You can actually get ideas from other people, which I'm pretty sure some of you guys have probably gotten from me today. Like, oh, I never considered that, using that idea with like the clapping or raising your hand and saying, you know, yes. Some people have told me like, I never thought of doing that before. I'm gonna start doing that now. And we get that from a lot of people. And then role models to influence, you know, confidence. That's what I do in working with the students that I work with on my campus. And then they'll no longer feel alone. So visibility and representation is everything. Again, at Samit Vai, you can go ahead and find me on all of my social medias. I'm on everything except Snapchat. I hate Snapchat. At Samit Vai, you'll be able to find me Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. And these are some things that I just wanted to make note of too real quick is, you know, you have the question, oh, you're autistic. I knew someone who was autistic. And then it's like usually like, oh, I had a classmate who had this condition that you do. And it's like automatically assuming that the two of you guys are the same thing. So then they'll like ask you, this is what he did to overcome his condition. Do you do the same thing? And it's like, no, like not even the same. Or it's like usually like a family member. Oh, I had an uncle who had this condition. This is something that he did. Maybe you should try it, right? You always get those comments. And yeah. So this is one thing that I'll go ahead and end with is, you know, judging everybody based on appearance. This is what some disabilities may look like to other people. Sometimes it's not even visible. So, you know, don't be too quick to judge other people. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up from there. Were there any questions that you guys had in terms of, you know, how to how to, like in terms of like advocacy or anything like that, how do you approach certain questions or anything like that?
So I'm gonna go back real quick to a couple of comments in the chat. There are some folks that had leave, but Zainab did say that when you were discussing about your experience at the bus stop, Zainab said the funniest instance for me was someone getting annoyed at me because I didn't need or want help with what they were offering. And Annabelle says, thank you so much. Your presentation has been so amazing. Lots of things to consider.
Mm-hmm. No, right. Yeah, no, that's definitely an experience that someone will encounter too. Like if they think they're being helpful, but if like, again, you have the right to refuse and say, no, I don't need your help, then it becomes like, well, like now you're being rude because you're refusing my, my assistance and stuff like, and I think we really do need to break that notion of like, they have a right to refuse, like they don't always have to say yes.
I know one thing that you touched on around advocacy and especially around representation really stood out to me because I know like I've done a lot of research around or feel the impact of representation and how it impacts the students I work with. What was my point? About being able to like really see someone and not feeling that representation. So if I'm, living in my own lived experience with these certain identities and I don't see someone or I don't feel like someone is hearing my experience the way that it has been, then therefore it's hard to feel like you're heard and seen. So I really appreciate that you touched upon that because I think that is really important when, especially around disability justice, but also other, representation for other identities.
Yeah, definitely.
Any other?
Yeah. Like any other questions, guys?
Okay. One question from Zainab is, what do you tell students who are tired of having to always talk to people about their disability to other people?
So and that discussion is going to be hard, right? Especially if you are a person who like can't use your own experience to compare to that kid, right? What do you say? Can you read it one more time just so I get the wording correctly?
What do you tell students who are tired of having to always talk about their disability to other people?
Yeah, see, now that's the hard thing. What I believe in teaching, if you have any condition, one, the reality is that you serve as representation for that community. It's just the way that it is, just like with your ethnic identity. If you're in an urban area and like, oh, you're a Native American, then you're like, everything that you do then is going to be associated with Native identity. So you just serve as that representation. Unfortunately, when it comes to, being educated on conditions and disabilities, we are not there to where like certain information is just common knowledge. And then the other bad thing is that we have misguided information, of, oh, you're a blind person, that means you can hear or you can see with your ears, right? You have all these assumptions that are spread and these notions on how people live their lives because they are different in this way. So the unfortunate thing is, at least from my personal own experience, you are always constantly going to have to be an advocate. You are always constantly going to have to educate. If you choose not to, fine, that is on you. Like that is a personal choice if you want to engage in those types of discussions. But personally, advocacy is what I do. So I know that the only way to change the culture and to change these very, very inaccurate assumptions about a particular community, you just have to talk about it. You have to correct it. You have to call it out for what it is. You know, and how do you address, though, like just a short conversation if someone approaches you and like, oh, what's that condition? Like, oh, what does that mean? Or you know, the question is the most annoying question you get as a blind person. How do you see if you're like low vision? Like, how do you see? Because there's so many factors that play into that, right? So one thing I tell people about me is, you know, like I like my depth perception sucks. If you were to toss anything to me, it would be like a 50-50 chance if I'd actually catch it or not. But I think the number one thing to respond if someone says, oh, I just get so tired of explaining my condition so much to other people. The number one thing you can say is that your experience is like your own thing. How can you word that though? Each experience is just subjective. So when it comes to, again, like these comments of, oh, I know this person with this other condition, this is something that they did, do you do that too? It's okay to be like, I feel it's okay. I think it's okay to state that, one, I don't have the obligation to justify how I live my life or what I do, you know, to anybody that I don't want to. But like from the other side, from another aspect though, like if you really want ignorance to like be eradicated surrounding these like questions and topics, it's going to take education on our part, I think. But what can you say to the student themselves who is like frustrated with always having to explain? I would encourage them to seek out their own community, because you do often get ideas from, you know, those same circles. This is something that I'm struggling with. How did you I hate using the word overcome. That's another thing, you know, like in the disabled community, we hate the word using overcome because then it's like inspiration porn, right? Like, but this is like some way that I dealt with it. Finding that community, other people who share either the condition or the identity, have them go to their community. This is something that I'm dealing with. This is something that frustrates me. How do you deal with it? You know, you always get more ideas from people who have tried different things. It's probably something you haven't even considered before. When it comes to like a specific label or identity.
Awesome. Zainab said, thank you. Any other last minute questions or any comments, anything that resonated with you today? Feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
Hi, this is Sol again. I just want to say that I'm definitely like very appreciative of this talk. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. So I think we're about ready to wrap up.
It seems so. It looks like there's no more in the chat.
So cool. So again, I constantly, you know, if you want to be engaged in more discussions, like at a later time or another time and place, and like if there's something I didn't touch on here, follow my social media account. Especially on TikTok, I'm getting more involved in the TikTok community now, and I'm legit like having these discussions on my TikTok account. It's not just like see me do this dance and everything like that. It's like actual deep conversation, and I like the engagement that I'm getting from the comments and the content that I'm uploading. So yeah, if you want to continue to be involved in discussions like this, definitely follow me on social media. And you know, you can listen and see more there and contribute more there.
And so I put an assessment link in the bottom for those of you who stuck around to the end. You can feel free to fill it out now or fill it out later today. I am going to be sending out an additional email to follow up with the assessment link as well. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, JD, for sharing your story and being in this space with us. I really appreciate it so much.
Thank you for inviting me. And thank you guys to all who showed up and like at least were willing to hear what I had to share. So you guys being here does make a difference. And thank you for willing to be a part of this.
Yes, go follow them on all the social media.
Yeah. Again, let me put that name real quick in the chat so you can copy it and save it. That is my username on like all across the board. So just type that in, you'll find me.
Well, thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a great day.
See you guys.
Great job, Emily.
Thank you. Here's my coworker, by the way. She is the International and Asian Pacific Islander PC or program coordinator in our office as well.
Okay, cool.
Hi, JD. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for today. It was really, really good.
Okay. I was hoping it was okay. Like, I don't know, like some points I was like talking too fast, but like I knew like I was dragging on time. I'm like, oh, some people already left. So
I don't think it was really you with the